Okay, next gear review. Sorry, I had to adjust the camera a little bit. Marantz 5220 cassette deck. Manufactured in the later 70s, mid to late 70s, 75 to 77, 78, somewhere around there. Series information. So here, this is kind of weird. Not really kind of weird. If you think about the time that they were producing cassette decks, mid 70s, right? They offered two different form factors at that point in time. So you had kind of the old school top mount cassette decks. So they had the 5120, 5400, and 5420. But here's the weird thing. So let me go back to form factor. So you had, the cassette decks that kind of lay flat, right? So they're top loaded. So you had those three models, right? And then you had kind of the traditional, what we know as a more modernized, or really traditional for more people, is this form factor here, where you have a door either comes out, which is normally what you see. Door comes out, put a cassette in, and then you close it. Well, Marantz kind of split the difference on this one. So even though it looks like it's a normal door opens, put the cassette deck in, or put the cassette tape in, on this deck, it's actually still a top loading cassette deck, although it's in kind of like a vertical face instead of a horizontal face. I don't know how else to describe it. It's still top loading, but it looks like it would be like a normal, typical cassette deck that we know cassette decks to be today. So this was considered top of the line for the two models that they offered with this form factor. You had the 5200 and the 5220. You could get them with or without the cabinet. I don't really know the difference between the 5200 and the 5220. I'm sure it's some of the functions that are kind of floating around in there, which I'll get to in a minute. And then you had, for the top loading ones, the 5120, 5400, and 5420. So when you're looking at this, it screams Marantz. This is just how their aesthetic was. I'm not real crazy about the aesthetic, but that's just me. I do like Marantz's. I just don't like the look of this cassette deck, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But in terms of features and functions, so here's the door open, or the door close, I'm sorry. You open the little protective door like this, and then you close it like this. In fact, let me put a tape in. I have a cassette deck. I'll just throw in. I don't know why I want to keep saying cassette deck. You know why? Because it's 8 o'clock in the morning, right? In fact, it's not even 8 o'clock in the morning. If I did these later, I'd probably grab a bottle of whiskey and talk to you about this over a cocktail or something. So anyway, to load a cassette into the deck, right, you open the door, and then it's I'll be honest, it's kind of goofy. And I'm going to talk to you about maintenance and serviceability and why I don't like this cassette deck. Then you have to slide a tape in, right? And then you push it down, right? And then it sits at kind of an angle. So again, more of a top loader, and then you close the door that way, right? You have tape counter reset. There's a memory on. You have eject. So when you eject, door opens and cassette slides down. Again, I don't know. I don't like it. I just don't like it. Eject, record, rewind, play. I'll go ahead and play. You see the meters jumping, so meters are doing their thing. Fast forward, stop, pause. We have a couple of mic levels, 2 mic inputs. We have a couple of line levels, right? We have a master level. Here's the power button. We have headphones. Then we have Dolby, right? Dolby FM, off, on. So what happens with this is, right, it's one or the other. Dolby on, then you have your bias selectors, and then a limiter on. I don't know what limiter is. Memory on, I don't really know quite what that does. Again, I'm not a cassette deck guy. I'm not a reel-to-reel guy. If I can find it in the owner's manual, I'll flash up a little thing that talks about whatever the heck that memory thing does. I don't know if I'm pretty sure there's an owner's manual out there. I did find a service manual on it. Right, so kind of typical cassette deck features. There are some adjustments on the back. You have like level adjust and some other stuff. I'll snap a picture. I don't remember what those are. I haven't looked at the back of this for a couple of days. But anyway, you do have some adjustments in the back that you can make if you want to. But other than that, I mean, other than the way that it loads and it ejects the cassette, is pretty much a typical cassette deck. You know, in terms of serviceability or repair, I kind of, it's anything that's tape I really don't like to work on. You have the worst of both worlds. You have the worst of the mechanical and the worst of the electronic, right? So I'm not a fan of working on reel-to-reels. I'm not a fan of working on cassette decks, so I typically won't work on them, right? And again, I'm not doing any repairs outside of the shop right now. I don't have time to do it. But you know, if something breaks on a cassette deck or a reel-to-reel, unless you know what you're doing and unless it's worth it, you're going to end up spending quite a bit of money to get it sorted out. So a $100 cassette deck to get sorted out could cost you $200 to $300. So sometimes it just doesn't make sense to go through and repair them. Now, I have not had to repair anything on this. I have not worked on one of these before. I would imagine just by looking at the layout on the inside, it would be a pain in the butt to work on. In terms of routine maintenance tasks and you know, minor maintenance things or serviceability things like a motor speed adjustment. So this does not, at least when I adjusted the motor, it has the motor speed adjustment actually on the motor. So what happens, you have the motor, there's a little tiny grommet, right, that you put a screwdriver in and then you adjust the speed that way. Sometimes the speed is controlled by potentiometers on a board, variable resistors on a board, not potentiometers. So you turn the variable resistors and you can adjust the speed that way. This one has kind of the traditional just go into the motor itself with a non-conductive, ideally non-conductive little screwdriver, and you can adjust the speed. So that was easy. You know, in terms of normal owner maintenance on something like this, like cleaning the heads or demagnetizing the heads, it's kind of a pain in the butt because, right, if you think about it, oh, that's door closed. So yeah, it's not very intuitive. How do you get a cotton swab in here and clean those heads well? Right, you can't do it. You can use one of those cassette head cleaners, which I have a couple of those, and I will normally run those between cassette tapes. I know that they don't do a great job. They do a good enough job. And then, I don't know, maybe once every month or so, I'll actually take some alcohol and a cotton swab, and I'll really get into the heads and clean them and clean the pinch rollers and all that stuff. How do you do it on this? I mean, how can you do that on this cassette deck without taking it apart? So, in my opinion, it's not real maintenance friendly for a user. It's not. So, you know, in terms of just getting the heads clean, what do you do? You have to buy one of those cassettes, you know, a head cleaning cassette or demagnetizing cassette, hope that it works, and then throw it in here and run it, you know, and cross your fingers that it actually cleans the heads well. You know, otherwise you're taking this out of the cabinet, taking the top off, you know, getting out the cotton swab and the rubbing alcohol and, you know, all that stuff. So, I don't know. Not a fan of that at all. It's a weird way to have to go in and do routine maintenance on this thing. In terms of what to look for on these, and in terms of like normal maintenance on something like this, I really couldn't find much on this particular cassette deck. Again, I couldn't find any you have to do these things to it when you get it, beyond the, hey, if this is your jam and this is your dream cassette deck and you're a tech and you're handy, recap it, you know, really service the heads. I love when people want to text me when I'm doing this. You know, it might be a good cassette deck for you, but if you're just like, hey, I just want to put a tape in and listen to it, you know, I guess that text just threw me off. So let me get back to what I was talking about. What I was talking about was if you're looking for one of these, and I have not worked on one. So, you know, what I would look for is cosmetic, glass, make sure this door is here, make sure all of these covers are here, make sure all of these covers are here. Ideally, an image with it powered on like this, so you can see that the meters are lighting up. Meters are working. It would be really good. You know, I don't know how parts availability is on this. When I looked for the sales and I went over the pricing information, several of these did sell. So I would think there were probably a lot of them out there. You might be able to score a new VU meter if one of these go bad, or maybe a slider, or, you know, a button, something like that. But I don't know that to be a fact. Naturally, the condition of the cabinet is a big one. So it's on this is cosmetic, because again, I don't know of anything you really need to look out for on this or expect to do when you get it. In terms of pricing information, so naturally this is with or without the cabinet. So I'm going to go with cabinet prices, just like this one. Naturally, the cabinet will either add 200 or subtract 200. In my case, you could expect to pay maybe a couple $100 less than what I'm going to go over. But when I went out there this morning, surprisingly, I didn't see anybody with crazy prices. The most expensive one that I saw this morning, and I don't know if I'll flash an image up or not, maybe on the day that I edit this. If there's a crazy one, I'll put it out there, because I won't edit this for a couple of weeks. If there isn't, then I'll put whatever is out there. But I think the most expensive one out there in the box was like $1,300, which is right around what I would expect to pay for one of these in really, really good condition. Now, I found one that was serviced. It wasn't in the cabinet, and I think it was around $1,300. One in the cabinet, you might pay $1,400 or more for one of these if it's been serviced, right, by someone who knows what they're doing. And, you know, the bad thing is on eBay, you don't know what serviced means. The serviced means they tested it and they cleaned the heads. I mean, technically they serviced it, but did they recap it? Did they change any belts? Did they change any pinch rollers? Right? What exactly did they do? Did they calibrate it? Do any of that stuff? You don't really know unless they include that in the listing. So when I say $1,400 or more, I'm talking about one that's actually been gone through, right, by a competent tech, right? It's been adjusted per the service manual, and nothing's out of whack, and it sounds good, and all that kind of stuff. One in this condition, because I have not done any of that, and I'm not going to do any of that because I don't have some of the equipment to go in and do all that stuff. I'm certainly not going to recap a cassette deck. Even if it were mine, I would not recap it. I might 2 years down the road if I'm super bored, right? But just the number of caps in one of these, I don't even want to mess with it. And typically they're a bear to work on. So one like this, working, sounds decent, looks decent, right around $1,000, right? I think that's what we're going to price this one down at the shop, right around $1,000. Parts, I did find a couple of parts machines on eBay. They were right around, well, actually the most expensive one was $500, and then there was one for like $350 plus shipping, something like that. So I'm thinking $500 or less, around that $400 mark. And I think those were both pretty clean. I'm going to flash the image up. You can see if I'm full of it or not. But I think those were fairly decent. Now, you could probably get one that's beat to snot with crap missing and this door gone and not in the cabinet for less than that. But, why would you? Unless you really, really, really like Marantz and you really, really want to get like a matching cassette deck for what you have, right? So if you've got a 2285 or something like that, or a 2275, probably be a better match, right? I see that. I'll be honest with you. I would buy 3 Nakamichi, or actually, if you're careful when you're looking for them, you could get 4 or 5 Nakamichi cassette decks that, in my opinion, are better, right, than this Marantz for the price of this Marantz, right? You can get probably a 3-head, like I've got a Nakamichi 3-head. I think it's a 311 BX 311. I don't know. I'll flash what I have up here. And I've got, I go through a lot of cassette decks. I have a 480 Z, which is a 2-head cassette deck. I got it for like $100, maybe $200, $175, $200, right? And those are better cassette decks than this. I'll just be completely honest with you. They're easier to repair. They're really pretty reliable. And I'm not a Nakamichi snob, but they just run, you know. They don't have this aesthetic, but although my 480Z is silver. So, you know, I could throw it into a cabinet with some silver-faced stuff and it would fit in there pretty well. So, again, this is one of those restored 1500-ish, working and clean 1000-ish, parts 500-ish, right? That's kind of where this cassette deck lands in that price range. So again, I am not a big fan, you know. I just think that's kind of goofy. But you know, at the time, that's what they were doing. Everyone was trying to figure out what the way ahead was going to be on cassette decks. And Marantz thought this was the way ahead, and I don't know how long it lasted with their other cassette decks, but I know this design did not stick around very long. It's kind of like the cassette decks where you push the tape in, the tape lays flat like in a car, put it in. There, I used to have a Pioneer, and I don't remember the model number, but I think it was made by Harman Kardon. It was like a Pioneer, something, was it a 1000 or something? I'll flash the image up if I can find one. Had these little round VU meters on it, and it was actually a decent sounding cassette deck, but man, it was goofy to work on. It didn't stick around very long. It didn't fit anything. Like in terms of the aesthetic, it was a different size. It was just kind of weird. But what I'm getting at is that form factor did not last very long either, right? Everyone seemed to land on the slide a tape in, close the door, play the cassette. Nakamichi did some weird things with a cassette deck that flips them around, right? And I'll flash an image of that as well. I've worked on 2 of those, so they're pretty cool, but that's just a gimmick, you know. Just tape is done, you want to play the other side, it just, this little tray slides out and then it turns around and goes back in. And that was before I was doing gear reviews. It would be a cool one to kind of show you how it works. But anyway, I'm rambling at this point. So this was the Marantz model 5220. Meh, you know, it's like okay, it's a Marantz cassette deck. You know, nothing special to me. Again, I would take a Nakamichi over this, or even a Pioneer. I would take a Pioneer over this Marantz, but you know, to each their own. So I think that'll wrap it up. So as always, if you like what you see, hit like, hit subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next video.